Okay, folks, welcome to my fifth and final video on Alphacore number 1. It's kind of amazing that I'm only doing 5 videos, but Chuck Dixon wrote a rather uncomplicated story, so there was no need to branch off into all the possible different things that went wrong, as I had to do with ISOM number 1 and ISOM number 2. And I will say that, because it's Chuck Dixon and Joe Bennett, there was a quality improvement, generally speaking, which is not to say by any means that the book is perfect. And with that, let's get on into the final nitpicks. One of these final nitpicks extends back into the second act of Alphacore number 1, and it has to do with this building that houses the Flores Park Police Department. This building is colloquially referred to as the barn, but we don't know that from this panel. In fact, we're never explicitly told that, and we don't get to connect the dots until much later in the book. That really should have happened on this panel. We needed a caption here saying Flores Park Police Department Headquarters, aka the barn, so that the first time that Ingrid Valdez brings it up in the parking garage, we know what it is that she's talking about. The only reason I figured out what she was talking about was that she also mentioned City Hall, and I was thinking, okay, so does that mean that this is some sort of civic building? The barn is some sort of civic building connected with City Hall or something, maybe the police department. Oh yeah, okay, I get it now, the police department headquarters. But really, I shouldn't have had to go through that kind of struggle. It's a nice joke as it is if you could just put it on this panel. That you could say, oh yeah, it does kind of look like a barn, doesn't it? So it would have helped the book to go ahead and put that caption in. Here we have the beginning of the third act, and we've got Brian Solari examining the flash drive that he's pulled from the bank. And then on the next page, we have this cutover to the police detectives who are going over security camera footage because they need to show their lieutenant and get him to authorize their next move. And then it goes back over to Alphacore again for another 3 pages until the detectives call Alphacore for backup. And it's like, don't do that to us. We don't need that many scene transitions. Instead, reverse the scenes and let the police detectives start it off, and then you can have 4 pages of Alphacore followed by the police detectives calling Alphacore. It's just, you don't want to overdo these scene transitions. It's kind of like back in the previous video on the second act slump, where I was talking about how we didn't want those scenes with Brian Solari and Ingrid Valdez in their respective fights jumping back and forth between the two. It would have been better to just have each scene sequential. The same thing applies here. Just give us the detectives, then give us Alphacore, then we can get back to the detectives later on. In this pair of panels, we have Sandy, who is like Alphacore tech support. She is looking at the flash drive that Solari recovered, and she's basically saying, well, we don't know what this is. It's sure to be encrypted. It could have all kinds of malware on it. And then we just have this panel where she's just staring at it silently. This is goofy. We shouldn't have this. And the easy way to fix it is to just take that lower balloon of dialogue in the first panel and move it over so that it is crossing the line between the first and second panels. That way it's not crowding in the second panel. And just let her say it there. Now, this is a scene where Braxwell has just stopped the telepath from mouthing off. And now that he's got the telepath bound, you've got these 2 clowns coming out of the house where the telepath was and basically threatening Braxwell. Now, he's going to get into a fight at this point, but we never see the fight. Instead, we just see the cleanup a few pages later. And I'm thinking to myself, why did we even need these guys in the book to begin with? These were like a couple of throwaway characters, and they're just clutter. I mean, at this point, we don't need any extra guys clogging up the works. You could have had a scene with the detectives basically trying to question the telepath, or basically, saying, okay, we're not going to let you open your mouth, but you will be writing responses on this, clipboard or something like that. So there were ways to, mark the passage of time in this scene without having to introduce a couple of throwaway characters that might have sparked our interest for a second, only to get, just basically laid out on the ground. And now the fight, oh God. I just have so much disappointment in Chuck Dixon for writing this scene. Because what you have here is Officer Wilkins, who featured prominently in the second act. Officer Wilkins revealed himself to be an Except, but an Except of incredibly low power. And here we have him using his incredibly low power to stop Alphacore headquarters from crashing into the barn. What? I mean, here we have him talking with Valdez, and he's talking about how he just has this party trick of manipulating anything metallic. He opens pickle jars without touching them, and he barely rates a 2 on the Schuster scale. Now, Ingrid Valdez does tell him that if he works at it, he can actually increase his powers, but there's not enough time for him to have possibly done that to the point where he's strong enough to do this. And I'm thinking, okay, am I supposed to think from this that he was hiding the fact that he was actually a very, very superpowered Except? Like, let's say he has superpower, just absolute scale of Omega level mutant powers. And he just doesn't want anybody to know that he has those because he doesn't want to be drafted into Alphacore or something. But that never comes up in his conversation with Ingrid Valdez, and in fact, he makes it sound like he's more of a superhero groupie type because he thinks, oh, you can get a car that's called the blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I don't have a superhero name. And so she's like dumping water on his superhero ideas. Oh, by the way, great work on matching that hair color. So he is obviously a low-powered Except who somehow is pulling out of his butt massive amounts of power, and it makes absolutely no sense. Now, what would have made sense is had Chuck Dixon tied this back to the scene he wrote in which Ingrid Valdez says, I'm feeling that feeling. You're an Except? Meaning that she is somehow able to tell when the people around her are exercising their powers, and she can detect that they are Excepts. And that makes me think that somehow she is tapped into the fundamental, whatever the source is of Except abilities, she's tapped into that somehow. And so maybe she, if she were with Wilkins, could have powered him up with her energy whips and basically channeled energy into him so that he was actually able to withhold the Alphacore HQ from running into the police department HQ. That would have made sense. And, of course, it would have burned him out like it burned him out here. Oh, by the way, did anyone else notice that Braxwell can freaking talk? He could talk the whole time. He's only been quiet because he wanted to be. Oh, my God. Sure, just have your character going around boring and shy of a personality. Ah, unbelievable. So at the end of the book, we have the confrontation scene between Alphacore and the criminal masterminds, Michael Copper and Lillian Renashi. And this is one of the worst cliches in all of crime drama storytelling. Let me tell you, I remember there was a CBS show, SWAT. I don't know if it's still on now, but there was a show called SWAT. And I'm talking about the SWAT remake, the one that starred Shamar Moore. Really, really good show in season 1, with the exception of one episode. And in that one episode, it seemed like they just said, let's get our B team of writers to just phone in every single possible cliche we can think of for this episode. And one of those cliches was the scene at the end where the cops arrive to confront like the big corporate mastermind, and they can't do anything to him because he's just too high up on the totem pole, and they don't have the evidence to convict him of anything, and so they're just basically there to give him a warning. And that is exactly what happens here, and it's so terrible. It's awful. It is such a cliche. And moreover, what the hell is up with their sparkiness? I mean, do they just not have control over their powers that they're revealing to the world the fact that they're accepts? And why is it that there's no reaction to the fact that they're accepts in this scene? Nobody seems to care. They're sparking all over the place, and yet that's just par for the course. I mean, I don't know. Is that how accepts are handled in this world? It's almost impossible to tell because we don't get a lot of impression of what the world is like out there. Then that'll be one of my later critiques in this video. Now, there is a major problem in the final portion of Alphacore number 1, and by final portion, I mean the back cover. This is the back cover material, the blurb that is supposed to be explaining what's in the book, and then, also talking about the creative team. So, let's go ahead and look at the text, and I'm going to do my standard nitpicking, just as I did with some of the text that appeared at the front of this book when it did kind of a blurb that sets up the story. You have to go back to my earlier video for that on It's Problematic. So we're looking at the back cover material, and we start off where it says, years ago, Brian Solari retired from the Texas military and settled down in Florispark. Florispark plays an important role in this blurb, so let's go ahead and put emphasis on that. He was a hero to most, but his mission was complete. Okay, that whole sentence really doesn't capture what it is we're trying to say here. Let's rewrite that and say, a war hero except looking for a new mission, and that basically gets the gist across. Brian believed that joining the police force, no, don't use that when you don't have to use that. Brian believed joining the police force would be the closest he'd get to being the good guy in a war. Well, aside from sounding naive as hell, just saying, I'm going to be the good guy in a war, that just sounds like an immature way of putting it. Let's say, get to fighting the good fight again. Tasked to deal with accepts. Now that's a little bit too vague because it's not like you have to deal with every accept that comes your way, just the criminal ones. Plus we no longer need the emphasis on accepts since we have that up above. So tasked to deal with criminal accepts, Brian realized that he needed allies. Again, there's that word that. Get that out of there. Brian realized he needed allies. He recruited Braxwell, and this marked the formation of Alphacore. Now, there's a couple of things with this sentence. One is, this marked the formation of Alphacore is a bit long. We can just shorten that to, and he formed Alphacore. But the other thing is that we don't actually know much about Brian Solari's powers or Braxwell's powers at this point. Well, we know that they're just basically flyers who are strong, and they have some limited invulnerability. So let's go ahead and put what little knowledge we have to use and say, he recruited fellow flying strongman Braxwell and formed Alphacore. The duo became a trio with the addition of Ingrid Valdez, but that doesn't tell us anything about Ingrid Valdez that marks her out. So let's say, upon adding energy whip-wielding investigator Ingrid Valdez. Together they nullify accept-related threats that occasionally plague this affluent city. Wow, there's a lot of things wrong with this. First of all, let's get rid of all the fluff. We don't need the comma, we don't need related, we don't need occasionally, we don't need affluent. Alright, together they nullify accept threats that plague this city. They, is there a way that we can describe the three of them that will get across the idea of who they are, of what their role is? Let's use together these super cops nullify accept threats that plague this city. Nullify, though, is kind of a wimpy word. Can we say combat instead? And then combat the accept threats instead of just accept threats that plague this city. And let's just go ahead and say, instead of this city, Florispark. All right, so now we've got that whole portion taken care of. Let's look at the right-hand side. Written by comic book legend Chuck Dixon, Alphacore number 1, let's capitalize Alphacore just because it's the title, sets out to familiarize readers with their new favorite team. Artist Joe Bennett brings the characters to life with his incredibly unique artwork. That's not actually saying much. You're saying that it's unique. It's so unique, it's incredibly unique. But that doesn't mean it's good. So why don't we say instead his uniquely incredible artwork? That means it's incredible in a unique way. This is what a first issue is all about. Ooh, the problems with this sentence. First of all, let's reverse the emphasis. This is what a first issue is all about. Excuse me. Now we can get rid of the undue capitalization and dash applied to first issue for some reason. I mean, somebody looked at the title like first issue special from DC Comics and think that was normal. And then all about is all about. This is what a first issue is all about. Let's go big or go home. Let's say this is what a first issue should be. And then, just for an extra kick, let's italicize this and give it a little bit of extra oomph. Now you've got the whole thing. This is the whole package. This is what should have been on the back. Except, I haven't even gotten to the major problem yet. Can you spot the major problem? You're only going to be able to spot it if you've read the book. But think about it. This is the synopsis of what goes on in the book. This is the back cover material. None of this is communicated in the book. This is all outside information. This information does not exist to the reader, and it just flabbergasts me that the crew of Rippaverse don't even know how to write a back cover synopsis, much less a comic book. Okay? You've got a back cover synopsis that doesn't actually summarize anything, except for material from outside the book. I mean, this stuff has got to be on the document cards if it's from anywhere, and you're forgetting that to the reader, the document cards don't exist. The only material that really exists is the material between the covers of your book, the material in the actual story itself. The back cover is just supposed to summarize what happens in the book, and this does not do this. This creates all sorts of background information that doesn't appear in the book, and which should have been communicated in the book. And there was ample room to communicate all of this, by the way. All of this could have been communicated in the book, but for some reason it's stuck and isolated and alone on the back cover, which, by the way, I did not read before reading Alphacore #1 because I wanted to stick to the principle that the only thing that matters is what's between the covers. So I'm glad I did, because if I had gone in with this extra information, I wouldn't have realized just how devoid of information Alphacore #1 is regarding the history. I'll be getting to that a little bit later. So what should have been on the back? Here is my attempt. When the Floor Spark police have an accept problem, they don't call SWAT, they call Alphacore. Special Police Accepts Brian Solari, Ingrid Valdez, and Braxwell have the skills and abilities to handle the superpowered threats normal police can't. After a hostage situation leads to a murder, Alphacore must follow a trail of clues putting them in conflict with deadly Accept criminals. Can the team track down the masterminds behind it all and foil their plans to destabilize the city before it's too late? Okay, that at least reflects what is going on in the book in such a way that it both sets people up with the basic information they need to know, and it gives a vague enough description of the action inside the book that readers will be able to say, oh yeah, that is a good summary of what happened. Now, here are my overall impressions with Alphacore #1, and I'm going to focus first on the third act. The third act pulls out all the stops action-wise. I mean, it's a very impressive and visually stirring action sequence. But these high stakes feel unearned and they lack context. I mean, we've only been exposed to Alphacore for so little time that for them to experience a crisis of this magnitude just feels like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And moreover, why didn't anyone foresee the problem with having a floating fortress above the city? I mean, did nobody look up at that thing and think, oh, well, there's no way that thing's ever going to, crash into the city? And moreover, what are the cannons for? This thing is, loaded with cannons. And that just drives me insane that we have this. It's a decent design, but at the same time, it raises so many questions about why do they even have this fortress? Why is it they don't just have something, a building in the middle of the city like the rest of the police department? This thing must be expensive as hell to maintain. I mean, and is it something that is a joint operation between the military and the police? And if so, why? Because you know that well, at least in the United States that we know, you keep this stuff separate. But again, this isn't the United States that we know because there was this great war of separation. And, that gets me into my next thing. There is no world building in this book. This book does not tell us really anything more than we've already learned from ISOM number 1 and ISOM number 2. We don't learn anything about Texas history, despite knowing from ISOM number 2 that Brian Solari was a hero of the Great War of Separation. And it's implied, but it's never stated outright, that Chief Holcomb was Brian's former commanding officer. I mean, that just seems to be there, but it also could be he's just treating the guy as if he's military. I don't know. We don't know anything. We don't have any idea what Ray's rank is. Ray seems to be a military officer of some sort. But we don't know that because Alphacore is supposed to be police. So why is he wearing military uniform? Same for Sandy. Is she military or is she police? We don't know. We don't even know how long Alphacore has been around, because their flying fortress is apparently new. It doesn't even have a name at the start of the book. They're still trying to name the thing. So there's a whole timeline of events that have built up to this that we could have been let in on, even vaguely, even just to give us a little hint, but we get nothing. And it's just so frustrating that we pay so much money to get so little information. Now, as regards character notes, Brian Solari is a low-rent Superman with fewer powers and fewer brains. He's the guy who just charges in like a bull. With all the mistakes he makes, he's practically the weakest link of the team. Now, he gets opportunities to learn about real heroism, but he absorbs no lessons. When you look at the scene where the bank manager actually saves the day from the guy who's breathing fire, he just makes Solari look like an ass clown. And Solari does not take any of this to heart. Why can't Solari learn something about the fact that people without powers can be heroes too? Because it seems like he needs some, ability to say that. That would be an interesting character flaw, is that he equates having powers with the ability to be a hero. And then he gets taught by people either without powers or with weaker powers that heroism is something that even people who are less powerful than him can aspire to. That would be a great idea for a character flaw that eventually gets remedied, that he experiences growth. Nothing of the kind happens in this book. Braxwell, the strong, silent, boring type. We don't learn a damn thing about Braxwell, other than that he's holding back on us. He can talk. Braxwell can talk. I guess just most of the time he doesn't want to, and to me that makes him embody Eric July's policy of communicating as little information to the reader as possible and thinking that provides value somehow. It doesn't, okay? Providing information is what provides value. All right? Ingrid Valdez. She's not a one-note character, but she's a two-note character at best. She desperately wants to be seen as a cop rather than as an except. She wants to be valued primarily for her brains and not her powers. Now, she's probably going to wind up being the team leader of Alphacore because Braxwell's too quiet and Solari's too dumb, and I'm not sure I really want to read that book. I got a much different impression of Alphacore when I was reading ISOM number 1 and ISOM number 2. That, Solari was somebody to be respected rather than, thought a dumbass. And that, maybe Braxwell had something wrong with him other than just being incredibly reticent. Ingrid Valdez, she did not seem like team lead material at all. She seemed more like, the kind of bitchy subordinate. And while I was looking forward to seeing how these characters would actually play out in their interrelationships with each other, I don't feel like ISOM number 2 and Alphacore number 1 really connect on that level. They seem just like different characters all around. So I don't know. These are not the characters I was really signing up to read. Sandy in tech support has a problem in that she has no idea what to do with the flash drive. Come on. Can she at least suggest finding a laptop that she can isolate and plug the flash drive into? Even I thought this up. Come on. I'm no tech genius. I've worked with computers for a while, but She's looking at this thing and even staring at it blankly and dumbly for a panel without saying anything at all, as if, it's like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. It might have a virus on it. Well, go get a laptop out of storage somewhere and plug it in there and make sure that the laptop is not connected via Wi-Fi, is not connected via network cable, and just see if there's any files on the thing. If it fries the laptop, hey, it fries the laptop. Now, if Solari wants to go in and say, well, we don't have time for that, and then, be his normal dumbass self and plug it into Alphacore HQ and fry the freaking systems, then he can do that, but at least make Sandy look kind of competent. Finally, we got Michael Copper and Lillian Ranashi, the ass clown villains of the book. Lillian has a few more neurons to rub together than Michael, but not many. They're just two, corporate types living a decadent lifestyle while trying to incompetently move in on Darren Fontano's territory. I mean, they actually make Darren Fontano look sophisticated, and that guy's an ass clown in and of itself. I mean, you saw that back in ISOM number 2, where he couldn't even threaten Santuan with more than limited employment. So, even though they are depicted as powerhouses on covers B and C of Alphacore number 1, they don't demonstrate any powers in this book. They don't have any powers other than just sparking energy in their peculiar colors when their emotions are high. These are underwhelming characters. They're basically jokes. And Lillian likes to think she's playing chess while Michael is playing miniature golf. But her master plan actually winds up being more destructive to them, more over the top than Michael's plan. I mean, Michael, all he wanted to do was blow up a bank vault. What did she do? She brought Alphacore headquarters down. Holy crap. I mean, that does not speak of wanting to divert attention from yourself. Because all of the information that they needed for Alphacore to connect the dots was already in Alphacore's hands. Oh my god, I cannot believe that. And it wasn't even something that they needed to do. I mean, Lillian even says that if they plug in the flash drive, then they're going to get a nasty surprise. So she doesn't even care whether they plug in the flash drive or not. But the fact that they did that means that now that Alphacore has to focus on them as being real, serious threats, because they just brought down a damn piece of machinery on the city. I mean, if the idea was to divert attention away from yourself, the worst thing you could have done was put that kind of software on the flash drive. Instead, put some files on there linking all of the crimes committed so far to some flunky in one of your shell companies. But don't bring down Alphacore headquarters with it. That's insane. Then they're going to be looking at you like a laser. Now, on story notes, I feel like this book could have been a mystery, a solid mystery book. But the problem is that Michael Copper and Lillian Ranashi were featured right out in the open on covers B and C. If you cut out all of the Michael and Lillian scenes from the beginning and middle of the book, then you can actually have a way to build a mystery out of all that. And I feel bad for Chuck Dixon, because I blame Eric for this. I mean, Eric had to be the one who approved putting Michael and Lillian on the cover and basically saying, we're not going to make this a mystery book, really. We're going to tell readers up front who is behind this all. There's going to be no mystery behind that whatsoever. Now, I tend to think, am I wrong? Am I misremembering that in the story blurb for Alphacore number 1 that they put on the website, it actually made it seem as though there was going to be some mystery as to who the masterminds were, even though Michael Copper and Lillian Ranashi were featured? I mean, this is it's like a company working at cross purposes with itself. And then finally, we've got thin character relationships, whether it's between Solari and Ingrid. There's a conflict between them. Solari and Chief Holcomb, there's a conflict between them, but we don't really get anywhere below the surface. Michael and Lillian, what is their relationship? Where do they come from? Those kinds of things. Braxwell and anybody, because he's just basically, he reminds me of the rook in chess. All you do is move in a straight line through whatever obstacle it is that you need to get through, and that's it. Not complicated. We only ever get, any bare bones of how these characters relate to each other, and that is such a problem, because it is through these character relationships that we learn about the characters. It is in the way that they conflict with one another. How does Solari react with Braxwell? How does Solari react with Ingrid? How does Ingrid react with Braxwell? How do Michael and Lillian react with other people not among them? Those are the kinds of things that we need to know about these characters. We need to get these characters out and about and interacting with one another. And it just doesn't happen. And one of the things that it makes me feel like every one of these characters is Miles Morales in a way, because that's one of the main problems with Miles Morales, is that he's got this isolated set of supporting characters, and because nobody else is allowed to get into that small set, we never learn anything about Miles Morales, like who he is to other people. That was one of my major beefs with that, and I feel like these characters are all being smothered in the same way. So my verdict really still stands. I mean, the good news is that despite its many quality issues, Alphacore #1 is standard comic book fare. But the bad news is that that's all it is. It's just a comic book. It's not a groundbreaker. It's not a world shaker. It's not anything special. And it had potential to be. And it's like that potential was squandered at every possible point. So I don't know. I mean, the only time that I ever had a sense that I was watching something kind of impressive was when I was in the third act of the book and I was going through, the Joe Bennett art of, the headquarters coming down and wondering, oh my gosh, how high are the stakes here and stuff like that. That was like maybe the one moment that I felt like, oh, this has the potential to be really good. And then, of course, Officer Wilkins comes out and it's like, well, just forget about story. Forget about actually, remembering what it is you wrote several pages ago. We're just going to throw all that out the window. So yeah, I was not really impressed by Alphacore #1. I think it's better than ISOM #2. I don't think it's as good as ISOM #1. Honestly speaking, I think ISOM #1 is still probably the best book that Rippaverse has come out with so far. So that is my impression of Alphacore #1. Thank you so much for sticking along with these 5 videos. If you haven't caught the first 4, please do go back and take a look at those. They do contain quite a lot of corrections that should have been made. One correction in particular that should have been made. Oh my goodness. And there also is one video highlighting somebody else's list of corrections that I did not agree with almost in the slightest. So do take a look at those, and thank you for sticking around. Please do subscribe so that when Yaira #1 comes out, you will be getting review videos from me on that. And there will also be reviews on other comics from other companies than Rippaverse. I know I've been very, very Rippaverse-centric, but I do have Andy Smith's Kordrath the Reckoning, and I have a lot of comics from Ethan Van Sciver in his latest Cyberfrog delivery. So we will be getting to those at some point, and I hope you will be along for the ride. Please do hit the subscribe button so that you will be notified when those videos come out, and I will talk to you later.